Okay, welcome to all of you to this panel discussion on public policy education in India, challenges and opportunities. Our other panelists, Professor Rajeshwari Raina, will join us in less than a minute, as will our Dean, Professor Sudarshan, who is joining us as well, and Professor Tanvir from Delhi University are all going to join in a minute. But I thought let's get started. So what we're going to do this afternoon is we'll follow kind of the order that is on the flyer. We will start with Dr. Arushi Jain, then we'll go to Professor Sridhar Pabisetti, and then we will move finally to well, here they are. Here is Professor Raina has arrived, and Dean Sudarshan, and Professor Tanvir is here as well. So we are just starting now.
Right. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, and so I was just saying the order in which we will do this so that Professor Raina can relax a little bit. We will start with Dr. Arushi Jain, who is the Policy Director of the Bharti Institute of Public Policy at Indian School of Business. We will then have Professor Sridhar Pabisetti, Founding Director of the Kautilya School of Public Policy in Hyderabad. And then we will have Dr. Rajeshwari Raina, who is a professor in the Department of International Relations and Governance Studies, School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Shivnadar. And we will discuss the opportunities and challenges of public policy education in India. This morning at the inaugural general meeting, I believe, that might be the right way to term it, of the Association of Public Policy Education. We had an interesting conversation on what needs to be done in the field of public policy education. And many of our colleagues there identified needs such as what really contributes a sound public policy education. What should be the curriculum? Do we even have a common understanding of what that curriculum should be? Of course, when our graduates go out, or before they go out, they ask, so who will employ, or before they join, they will typically ask, if I do this course, where will I get a job? Public policy, as you know, as an academic field, one might trace back to Harold Laswell from 1934, maybe, in his early work on the policy sciences. So in that sense, it's not that new. But as a formal education degree program, as far as I can tell, it's probably a few schools in the country that offer formal degrees in public policy, MA degrees, one or two. The only one I know of right now who is actually offering even an undergraduate degree in public policy is perhaps our own. I have raised questions as to whether this makes any sense. So there are a range of issues, challenges around public policy education, which we want to explore this afternoon. And we could not have asked for a better panel of the three experts that we have, who are all have been engaged in one way or another in public policy research and education for years. So I will not want to take any more of your time, and to jump right into it, I will ask panelists to do like a 10-minute overview of their main ideas. And then we will get into a more discursive mode where panelists can question each other, but also our participants can then raise questions and we can have a good discussion session. I think panels work better like that rather than long presentations. So if you don't mind that format, then we can get underway. And I will ask Dr. Arushi Jain to lead us off. Dr. Jain, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Singh, and a very good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Sudarshan, team from the Jindal University. my fellow panelists. It's truly a pleasure being here and talking about public policy education in India, a very imperative topic for sure, and something that, we have been thinking about, deliberating about in various forums. And this is a very right opportunity, when a lot of people involved in public policy education are here today to talk about this issue. I'm going to just, begin by talking about some general, observations when it comes to public policy education. Some of them have been outlined by Dr. Singh right now, but I would also like, in the later half of what I'm talking about, I'm going to talk about the ISB's model for now, because the focus of the ISB's program is on executive education, and there are a lot of programs that we have, our flagship program, but others too, where the focus is public policy education in a very different way from what exists in other universities and academic institutions in India. So having said that, we all understand the demand, the supply, and the design of the public policy programs. The education is a matter of concern in India. The West has seen tremendous progress when it comes to public policy education, but when we talk about India, it's still at quite an infancy, wherein, even though there is a lot of demand in terms of jobs, in terms of, career opportunities at different levels, but still the demand hasn't been able to create, create a buzz that the supply matches the kind of demand that's there. That's what our observation is. The growing number of think tanks, the growing number of, the kind of jobs that are coming in the government sector, whether it be at the very, initial level when it comes to hiring interns in departments or fellows with the governments, to the very high levels of positions like Joint Secretary in the Government of India being open to the private sector. And there is this lateral entry that is happening in the recent times. So, of course, the opportunities are immense, and the supply side has to take care of this demand side to be able to cater to the demands. So, there have been recent papers, some of our friends, Ishani and Daya Maurya also came up with a very nice paper in the Asian Journal, wherein they wrote about the public policy education in India, and they did a lot of consultations, forum discussions before they came out with that paper. So a very interesting read, just as reference for our people here today. What started as public administration trainings in India earlier on, moved on to a number of universities, starting with public administration post-graduations, and slowly and steadily understanding the difference in public administration and public policy, moving a bit towards policy analysis. And now we have a number of schools, mostly private institutions, that are, that have public policy education to talk about. So we have to first understand the criticality of the issue. The first is as I said, the demand side of it, then the supply side of it, and also the third is the design of the public policy programs or the curricula when we come to that. I have briefly touched upon the demand and the supply. When it comes to curricula, again, it depends on the clientele. It depends on the level in which we are taking these programs ahead. So, for example, if the program is for an undergraduate level, which I think is really important, because if right at that age, the students can start thinking about policy education as a career in itself, which they navigate over a period of time, and they land up to public policy after 20 years of their service or career, I think that is going to have a great difference in case, we have more schools offering undergraduate programs in public policy. Of course, graduate schools are increasing. There is a huge demand, and there is also, a lot of uptake of these programs with top institutions across the country now offering public policy education at the graduate level. When it comes to Indian School of Business, we have a very different model, and our programs right now catering to public policy are basically the executive education programs. So we have the advanced management program in public policy, which is a one-year hybrid program both for the public and the private sector. And this has basically been designed so that there is no disruption to the ongoing work. So, there are these very senior government officers, there are the public sector professionals, and the idea is peer learning when it comes to people from diverse sectors being there in the classroom, interacting with one another across a year and learning from that experience of being together and learning from the perspective of each other. What has happened with public administration training or civil service training is that the perspective is just limited to the public sector. But the idea here, when we developed this program, was to have a 50-50 ratio in the classroom so that we can give this diversity, we can bring in this diversity, and the discussions, the deliberations in the classroom can be at a very different level. Having said that, it's not just enough to bring in different sectors, but it is also very important to understand the needs and requirements of these sectors when it comes to people with 15 or 20 years of average experience. So the curricula needs to be designed. The curricula needed to be revamped, relooked at almost every second year. And we have tried our best, to relook at it, to discuss it with the practitioners of public policy, with the academicians in the policy field, and to suit it to the Indian needs. When we talk about executive education, there is a lot of difference, in pedagogy. So the teaching is a lot case study based. It's much more practical in nature. And when I talk about a case study approach, one constraint that is there in India is that we do not have public policy centered cases, Indian specific cases as a repository. All we get is, from the top case, publishing houses. The cases are mostly from the West, and the policy is being talked about from a very different perspective. We are trying to solve a bit of this, but I think that's just a stone in that entire, space. I think public policy education institutions should also try and integrate research as much as possible in the policy education sphere, so that all of us can, benefit from this research, the case studies that are developed, and all of these can be shared learnings across institutions over a period of time. Talking about case studies, there is also a need of outreach. So, for any specific field to grow, for any specific field to understand, area to understand the demand and the supply bit, it's very important to hold deliberations, conferences, dialogues, conclaves, whatever you call that. But the more the number of these kind of events, the more will be the interest from different stakeholders. If I'm speaking about public policy, then of course the stakeholders of public policy here. So for example, dialogues or conferences wherein the government, the industry, the consultancies, the think tanks, the academic institutions, the researchers, and the policy students, all of them could come together, could discuss upon imperative issues around policy, discuss about how public policy can actually go further in a country, in a democracy like India, and the way public policy has taken shape of late. I think these are kind of events that public policy institutions should also focus on, and we all should probably, join hands so that all of us are a part of these kind of discussions over the year, from time to time so that all of us can contribute to the spread of public policy education in the country. There are a lot of things that probably we all can talk about when it comes to education and the modes of, how these programs are being delivered. So there are one-year programs, there are the two-year programs, which are all graduate programs. There are the undergraduate programs, and then there are the hybrid learning programs, which are specific time and also very different certificate programs that are existing. The need is to integrate, again, as I said, some bit of research into it, focus on evidence and data, focus on policy analysis as a part of the curricula so that, all of this becomes a part and parcel of policy education and policy teaching in the future. And I do hope with the kind of uptake that policy programs have taken in the private sector as such, with almost 17 private universities today having public policy programs, and somewhere around 9-10 government or partially funded institutions having this program. I think there is a very, very positive response that public policy education has seen in the last 1 decade, I would say. And I'm sure this is a very positive trend wherein all of us are, contributing, and we do hope to contribute in a much better fashion. I'm going to stop here, but I'm going to talk about a lot of other aspects as we hear the other panelists and listen to the questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jain, for those opening remarks, and you have touched on a wide range of issues. Let me urge our participants to make a note of their questions so that we hear the other panelists before we start our discussion. Dr. Jain touched on several issues: policy stakeholders, case study approaches, the importance of research. I wasn't aware that we had 19 private institutions of
17
plus another almost 10 of public or semi-public. So growing industry. But let's turn now to Professor Pabisetti, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me for this wonderful gathering. On the very optimistic note that Dr. Arushi started off, I think we are very excited with what we have seen in the public policy education space in the recent years. We were one of the early movers where we started crafting this program. And when we started, we had to look at various dimensions of how do you make sure that there's a well benefits a master's level student to enter, learn a lot of things while they are here, and be capable of entering into a career in public policy, not just a job at the end of a 2-year program. And hence, we kind of went through a whole lot of visioning exercise. We were very blessed to put together a wonderful advisory board who had decades of experience being involved in public policy from all aspects of the practice itself. So to begin with, one of the things that we rallied our energies was to come up with a vision for our whole school. And point was very important for us. Our vision is to rebalance the role of society, government, and business towards the equitable and regenerative India. And why just stop at India, the whole world, right? This lofty vision was made possible because we had various stakeholder inputs that we were able to get and say, if, because we don't have to be stuck in the past and we can be forward looking, what is it that we need? And that's where I think this whole vision of the society, government, and business working harmoniously towards a shared goal post became a very important rallying point for us. And even after 70 years of being an independent nation, 75 years of being an independent nation, we still have a lot of developmental challenges that hold us back. And that's where we need to spend a lot of energy on identifying the problems, things that hold us back, and what are the solutions that we could bring around for inclusive growth is a very important focus. And as we all know today that there are many, many climate actions that have come to the forefront today, and we can no longer try to think that somebody else will solve it. And that's where we kind of look at equipping our students to understand what are the moving parts in the journey towards a regenerative future, and we help them to make sense of these moving parts and craft their own solution vision go forward. And that's where we don't see our students as just job seekers. We see them as problem solvers. And once we see them as problem solvers, looking at large challenges and not looking at challenges at a very micro vision of it, it makes a lot more sense in the classroom when we look at a problem and then look at what is holding us back and what are the ways in which we can bring society, government, and business together to solve these things, and how best the public policy can be the instrument that enables a joint action of all stakeholders. And with this background, we were very, very blessed to have our initial cohort who will be graduating very shortly in the next few months. They came in with a very, very impressive diversity. We had only 35% of our cohort who were freshers. So 65% of them were people with prior experience. And the delight was that 16% of these students were students who had more than 5 years of experience, right? So that kind of knowledge and wisdom in the class makes for very, very rich conversations that happen. And not just in terms of experience versus freshers, even the profile of undergraduate studies from where they came is also very interesting. About 30% of them came from humanities, 30% from technology background, and the rest were from various other streams. And this made for very interesting discussions wherein you had to kind of make sure that there is right balance of rich data being guiding the force, as well as a humanistic view of the problem. And today, as they are completing 2 years, there are people who have crossed over and now demanding the other's perspective be made part of the solutioning process. And this interplay has been a very, very welcome point of us. And as Dr. Arushi mentioned, the gender gap is something that we are very, very conscious of. And we are very glad that 40% of our cohort are women. That's a good place to start, but not enough. And we are very, very eagerly working towards making sure that there are more and more women public policy practitioners who are coming in. And in this journey, I think we should understand that it's not enough that we have only 17 offerings that are there in India today. There is place for many, many more public policy school and institutions to come in. There is a need for a lot more PhD programs to come in, because that's where we will get good quality faculty to come in and make sure that there is research that comes back into the classroom. Acknowledging the challenge that Dr. Arushi mentioned about lack of case studies, we have been very, very consciously enhancing, a very, very focused approach of creating caselets to begin with, which we are continuously enhancing to become case studies. Another challenge that we find, and which is a very, very important challenge in India, is about the lack of open data that is substantial for us to make informed choices of what are the policy directions that we can take to the future. And this is something that we have been working, and we continue to work to open up a lot more data sets into the public domain. And this is something that will need all our attention and focus. The other thing that we are very glad is the diversity in terms of where our students come from. Our cohorts have students from 17 different states. And when we look at any public service delivery issues in the class and discuss, we get the benefit of understanding public services more efficiently as compared to the others, and what are the reasons that some students are able to perform some services better than the other. And I think this diversity is something that will benefit public policy programs, and we will all be able to bring in a lot more meaningful discussions in the classroom and take it forward. In terms of challenges, I think challenges are only opportunities for us to work towards and make it more meaningful. One of the big challenges that we have is that the lateral entry opportunities in big enough for all our graduates to get in. So I think we should all work together to work with various government, state and central, as well as city governments, to open up a lot more of positions that can accommodate all the wonderful problem solvers that we are training through our programs. And I think I'll stop here, and I'll be very happy to answer questions and look forward to an engaging conversation.
Thanks very much, Professor Babisati. As we agreed, we will, yes, come to those questions in a minute. But we will first have Professor Rajeshwari Raina share her thoughts with us for about 10 minutes or so, and then we will open up for a discussion. So, Professor Raina, great to see you again. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Sudarshan, Dr. Naresh. It's great to be here again. And of course, public policy has been, in some sense, well, let's say a clandestine obsession with me, because I'm not a public policy teacher, or have never taught a full course on public policy. But it features in at least two of the courses that I teach in a big way. Well, some of these things, that the question of pedagogy is what really attracted me to this whole agenda that you have here. Let me just quickly run through this, well, let's say what I've noted down as points that I want to make. Two major points. One is this well, let's say, moving out of the so-called problem-oriented Laswellian policy research or policy agenda, and teaching students how to do a problem-oriented policy research, and moving more towards what we now know as the interpretive policy research. This helps students to ask questions about the existing policy processes. I mean, we were just talking about why the court has to intervene in the construction of a highway, or about cows on the roads or something, right? So who are these people who are making policies? How are these policies made? In other words, get students to look at, well, the ways in which theories and concepts that are available today with us, including data. I'm so glad you mentioned data, Dr. Babisati, because the question of data, what is evidence? Yeah. So how do we frame that evidence? So if we can get students to ask questions about how do we do what we do, yeah, instead of just saying, okay, these are the solutions, we'll go out and solve them. Well, a lot of people, especially some of these papers that were mentioned here, also agree that we need a change in that kind of framing of policy education. And I think we in India should do it if nobody else will do it. Again, disappointed with the case studies from abroad. I completely agree on that. But what do we do instead? I mean, what are our alternatives now, right? So that's the first point that is I want to make about, let us focus more on building public policy schools, public policy curricula that are more about interpretive policy research, but interpretive policy understandings, where students get to ask some of these questions, focus on how do we work out what should be done. That's in other words, the how question is loaded with history or historical and institutional drivers of the actors and their agency involved in the policy process, right? So we have to get students to get into that depth. Yeah, it's not just enough to give them a smattering of, let's say, a breadth of different cases. We have to get them to see, okay, get a handle immediately on, okay, they went wrong in the choice of the policy alternate, that is, you had a goal, but in the choice of policy instruments, they went wrong. So the student should be able to get that immediately, and that's how we should design our curriculum. I'm just going to come to my second point, which is about teaching students about knowledge policy relationships. Yeah, I mean, I'm not making a distinction between natural and social sciences here. I think all the sciences are important. So the twofold, well, let's say, expressions of knowledge in every policy that we do. I mean, everything that we call policy, right? And also a little demystification here of policy, because it's not just a private sector and a public sector that has policies. People have policies. I mean, it was my policy today to come here. Yeah, it was your policy today to invite me, right? So we all have our policies. We all have our what's called a policy goal, a set of policy instruments that we choose, the ways in which we make those choices amongst a set of alternatives, pick the right policy instrument, and again, the ways in which we implement it. Yeah, whether it's a drinking water and sanitation program or a larger policy or act, but at which point does a policy demand an act and a policy is not enough? There's several questions of the sort where knowledge policy relationships are important. Of the curriculum that I have seen, I've not seen all 17, yes, but I've closely looked at about 6, 7 of them. I don't think any of us are giving this focus, that is the ability to piece out, let's say, pull out an instrument and say, but you know, our overarching framework is one of social justice, and you've introduced something on just mere efficiency, which has nothing to do with equity or distribution. So how does that instrument work? A student should be able to spot that immediately, right? And that is where the knowledge policy relationship matters. We should be able to teach students that, irrespective of which sector they are working on, public or private. If our goal is something and our instrument doesn't fit in, or is a theoretical, well, what's called a theoretical misconception, or let's say a misfit there, a student should be able to point that out immediately. So I think we should get back a little to I think our policymakers also need this, not just students. So to learn about the conceptualization, and even before the conceptualization, the framing of evidence. Yeah, one of my teachers, you know him, Professor Vaidyanathan, used to say, you know, this obsession, and Vaidi, of course, was one of these teachers who would tell us, just don't look at the data, say what framework is that located in? Yield per hectare, you know, what does it mean? What do you hear? Yeah. What do you hear? What is it that you hear? Yield per hectare in a dryland agriculture system should be yield per hectare per mm of water. What I'm saying is the kind of, that is the framing of that evidence. It is, here's a dryland farmer who's working on, well, dryland agriculture, but where water is the constraint. Land is not the constraint. He has probably 16, but the guy doesn't have water. Yeah. So his maximization, that is his policy objective, including the policy objective that should ideally be out of the state, is to maximize whatever he gets from the little water that he has. But we don't measure yield per hectare per mm of water. We go by blanket measure of yield per hectare across the country, across all crops. So we need different data. I completely agree with you on this question of data. Again, substantive economics, not the formalism. Again, 1970s was a period when we had a lot of debate about formalism and substantialism in economics. We somehow forgotten that debate. It's time we bring this back. And I think in this country, we can bring this back in a big way. So going back to teaching public policy, you were saying this, suggestion that we were walking the side saying, you know, somebody who's good in economics can teach public policy, but only if they can draw these lessons. That is, getting to this, let's say, this interdisciplinary understanding of the terrain. Yeah, and I think we need to build that. We can do that too. I'm just going to give a little example of a little trick that I use in my class. So I come to the class and say, okay, public policy, let's talk about policy choices. Policy is all about choices. Yeah, we all have choices and we all have ways of achieving these choices. So I just give them, well, let's say 3 or 4 cases. So I say, well, let's look at tanning techniques, tanning technology, and
I think we lost them there.
Yeah, I think it's a technical glitch. Let me also message them and let them know that they are off.
Right.
to a curriculum into an entrance exam when we take them in. There's no other governing well, let's say principle that gives us this diversity. So there are several ways in which we can bring these in, but let's say these desirable elements into this. So the class that goes on and asks, what are the alternatives that are available today? How can we construct new ones? Who are the people who are preventing us from constructing new alternatives? Yeah. And if you don't do that, you will never get to, well, even conceptualize a policy problem properly. So I'm just going to end with this, that, for us, Laswell is, well, the father of policy research. Harold Laswell, we all say yes. But I would take this a step back and say, in time, and look at Veblen and say, Thorsten Veblen's work on, well, why is economics not an evolutionary science, is perhaps a must read for all in public policy. Thorsten Veblen's analysis of the leisure class, the ways in which we make decisions. Yeah, Veblen's analysis of science as the dominant culture today. Yeah, and how is science used? How is, well, in economics, for instance, how is a poverty line used in policy making? Poverty line is basically a kilocalorie measure of what can sustain a body, right? Ultimately boils down to the biophysical reality. So let's look at some of these, well, let's say, what is kind of in sense blurred or obscure to the student as some of these biophysical realities, bring it back to the substantive data bits that we need to put in. Two points, therefore, again, to emphasize this is very serious attention or very serious focus on the interpretive policy research capacities that should be built into a curriculum. And two, a more, well, let's say, case building, analytical emphasis, including theories and concepts of each of these pieces of data that we use through analysis of knowledge policy relationships. I think that should be our, that's my, let's say, dream curriculum. I'll stop here now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Raina. And now we have heard all three of our panelists. Before I ask one or two questions of each of the panelists interacting with each other, it'll be interesting, for example, to see how this issue of problem-solving approach versus interpretive approach, whether they is a matter of emphasis or needs to be interlinked and done iteratively with attention against each other and so on. Well, we can talk about all of that, but let's get the audience in and then we will do that. Who would like to start with questions? Those online can just put their hands up or post a question in the chat box, but those in the room can maybe start while I look for hands up on the screen. Who would like to start? Sudeep? Yeah, please.
Yeah, actually, I was very much interested in this point, which Professor Singh also mentioned, that the possible interlinkage between the problem solving and the integrative approach. And also that this knowledge policy kind of interrelation, they keep on evolving too. There's an evolutionary perspective to that. So based on that, how problem solving tools need to evolve. So I'd like to get some examples from you based on that.
Let's take one or two and we'll see. So we get maximum inputs. Anybody else ready to ask a question?
It was interpretive,
not integrative, interpretive and problem solving orientations. If not ready yet, Professor Raina, you want to react to that? Oh, Rajneesh, did you?
Yes, actually, I want to share something before I ask the question. Okay. Yes, what I want to share is that I'm a student of the Masters in Public Policy program of Jindal Global University. And I came here after 35 years of work experience. So I was a strange person. I probably contributed to the diversity of the institution. But what I joined was the executive program, which was to be done in Delhi over weekends. And I came to the university and fell in love with the campus, fell in love with the people here, the few people that I'd met. It was a smaller place at that time, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I did my master's program, and I want to share with you why I did it. Perhaps just to bring in a sense of why a person like this would come and spend 2 years. You would expect an executive to carry on with his job or her job and then do something on the side. So I wanted to delve deep into it. I completed my tenure with the Tata Group, completed my contracts. I was on the verge of completing them. So I did not sign the new next 2-year contract or something. But my job had been to deal with the government and to not influence the policy. Tatas don't do it in that way, but to make sure that the policies were suitable for making the business of the companies grow. So I was with Tata Steel and then with Tata Power performing both these functions, roaming the corridors of the ministries, central ministries, state government ministries. And I found myself hollow inside because I didn't know what policy was. That's the reason that I wanted to do a master's in public policy. I was, sometimes pushing an agenda that this, scheme would be very nice or usually beneficial for me, sometimes also beneficial for the state or the nation. But I wasn't really educated in it, because when I was studying, there was no concept of public policy. There was public administration also was like a very, very small thing. I did my BA honors in economics from St. Stephen's College, 1974 to 1977. And even Rawls had not come about. Rawls had written, but we didn't know about him. Foucault came, of course, a decade later. So we didn't know much. So I wanted to fill up the gaps in my knowledge of theory. That's what I came here for. So I wanted to share that it's been a wonderful experience. And I teach part-time at the university now, at the law school. And I teach some courses relating to energy, coal. What I saw in the government had distressed me. I was looking for my answers. What distressed me was, the turnaround in the 90s, which we call liberalization. It seemed to have been haphazard. When I look back at it, it seemed to be haphazard. It seemed to, lack a lot of substance. And I wanted to research that as well as look at the theory. So I had the chance over here to be taught by excellent faculty and also look for my answers in the works of great masters, which were all available here, and to discuss them with people who are involved in the field. And that was something that was very enriching. So for a person like me, that could be a focus, and perhaps more like me could come and dig full time into it. Now, I'm not seeking a job. So I'm not the typical student, 25-year-old or 22-year-old. So we have to balance what a course does for people of various diverse, what I found in my classroom at Jindal School of Public Policy were students 20 to 24 years old from all over the country. So we had about 22 at that time in my class. Everybody was 20 to 24, but they were from, each one perhaps was from different parts of the country. So they brought in diversity that way. And I think that to contribute to the discussion that's going on over here, I think the practical aspect of the practitioners also needs to be brought in. The theory, of course, the interpretive theory, we're talking about case studies, but actually getting practitioners to contribute as much as they can, practitioners in the government, bringing them not only to educate them, but also to contribute to the discourse of the policy with their experience. Thank you.
All right, so we have a few questions coming up now in the chat box, which I'll come to in a minute, but let's get a quick feedback now from our panelists, starting with Professor Raina. A question was asked to you, and then we'll see if our two other panelists would like to comment on what they have heard so far before we take others. Please.
Thank you. I mean, so I agree with you, Sudeep, that ultimately the goal is problem-oriented. That is our purpose, right? I mean, that's, if there is a problem, we should go out there and solve it, right? I mean, or we should help people out there to solve it themselves. I mean, either way. But the problem with let's say, or the concern with public policy education, policy sciences in particular, is that Laswell's conceptualization of the policy science is one of an apolitical policy science. That is, it is a complete immersion in the problem context, in the problem understanding, but coming up with a solution that is applicable then and there. And he doesn't mention that it is a situation loaded with politics. Knowledge politics is the second part that I mentioned. So there is a way in which interpretive policy research brings in, well, let's say the historical differentiation of the castes. Yeah, somebody in let's say Kerala or Tamil Nadu taking a Dalit girl taking a cycle through the village can get killed, right? I mean, the point is we're talking about a historical and institutional drivers, a set of drivers of the problem. Those are kind of cleansed in Laswellian problem-oriented policy research. But that problem is present there, you give them a solution, you walk out, that's it. Yeah. Now, that's not the way interpretive policy research would work. You'd come up with this loaded and with a very clear understanding. There's nothing wrong, as Mirdal says, put your values on the table. Say, these are my values, this is where I come from, or this is where my interpretive policy research comes from, or our group with stakeholders or others, we decided. So integration is possible if we are bold enough to lay out that this is, we want a solution that is informed with these historical and institutional drivers. That's great. Then the integration is possible of the interpretive policy research school into a problem-oriented policy research approach. Yeah. The second part about knowledge policy relationships, yes, I mean, that is important, like you said, but let's say there are different models that are given to us. Some of us don't even realize that this is the model that we are living and breathing. Like we all have an assumption that, well, you know, science speaking truth to power, or the modern model is what works. Yeah. If that had actually worked, we wouldn't have had poverty today. Yeah. We wouldn't. So it's not for lack of evidence. So there is evidence on poverty. There is evidence on what drives poverty, what causes poverty, but we don't seem to be doing much about it, right? So the second or third model of, let's say, a discretionary model, a precautionary approach. All of us think precautionary approach is where, you know, the policymakers are taking precautions. No, it's where the knowledge system is taking precaution. They are hiding their backside, saying, we know this much, now you do what you want to do, right? So they're giving the evidence to the policymaker and saying, abhi aap kar lo. This is all we can say. Yeah, it's like the BT.
Are they hearing us? IT?
We can hear you now.
Just now.
Okay, sorry about that. Dr. Jan, I was just saying, ask whether you want to react to what you've heard, the two interveners.
So no, Dr. Raina has actually covered quite a lot. I would just like to say that, of course, interpretive policy research, you know, this issue is important and has been discussed. The idea around practitioners being involved in it, not just from the government, but I feel that the practitioners, even from the other sectors who have, you know, been a part of the policy process in some way or the other, and it could be at a local level, at a regional level, or at a global level. I think those are the people who should be involved with the policy institutions to take, you know, these issues into consideration and then develop this further. So I think that's all right on this. Yeah.
Professor Pabisati, quick reaction?
I think I'll also kind of try and answer the other question of what kind of tools can we use. And one of the things that we do in some of our courses is try and do simulations of saying that, okay, if you do this, what is likely to be the action, right? And I think those kind of tools are very helpful. In one of our courses on public policy, thought and action, we actually spend 2/3 of the course only looking at gamifying and understanding what are the implications of different choices, right? That's very important. And I'm really glad that, you know, as like at Kautilya, the more and more experienced students we get in the class, they actually come with a real focus on what is the learning that they want to get out of it, right? Not just say, okay, fine, I'll take whatever you say at the face value and live with it, and then figure out there might be some utility later on. They're very, very kind of keen on trying to say, hey, can we spend a little more time and get to a more concrete roadmap of what I could do, or what we could do, or what I have seen happen at my workplace in the past 10 years, 15 years, right? And I think having students with a decade and a half experience has been really helpful for us, because they are the ones who kind of, you know, take us that next level step and say that, hey, you know what, help me understand why did this action happen in the past in the context that we were in, right? So it's important that we kind of get into this mode of trying to push each other in the classroom, right? And as a matter of design, what we also do is to kind of have quite a few electives in our program being taught by true practitioners, right? And they kind of have the entire control of the course. They have to, of course, meet the academic requirements. But beyond that, they are the ones who push the students to go out into the field, do specific set of observations, come back, and then tell them that, how is the reality different from what different players are doing in the ecosystem? And why isn't that, why isn't that we are able to achieve the policy objectives that have been out policies that we have undertaken? So this bringing in more and more practitioners, both as students, as faculty, as board members, has all paid us very rich dividends in the kind of conversations that we are able to set up and have in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. So the comments we have heard have answered one question that I can see on the chat, which is why not build more skills, policy skills into the courses we teach? And I think that's what's coming out from this conversation. But I wanted to ask maybe Professor Sudarshan to answer the other question, which I saw, which was, what is the role and purpose of the Association for Public Policy Education?
Thank you very much. We just had in the morning the first general body meeting of this Association for Public Policy Education. The reason is that, we have some virtual associations. There's the India Public Policy Network. One of the annual conferences was hosted by Dr. Arushi Jain in Mohali. There's an upcoming one in Ahmedabad. But this network is able to organize an annual conference. There's one coming up in Hyderabad again, yes. But it does that when there's a host institution willing to organize the event. But we thought this field requires a legally registered association, which is in a position to raise some resources and work instead of just one annual conference, conduct workshops and dialogues to, make the field meaningful, right? I mean, when I still think that it's 10 years now we've been doing the public policy MA, but still it's like building the ship while you're sailing it. There's still a lot that needs to be done. One major challenge is really that, unlike the United States, where there is many top universities offer programs in public policy, executive education, as well as programs for regular students, long established. And the culture in the United States has facilitated that, because every time an administration changes in the US, at the policy-making level, they bring in people from outside. And if those persons have some idea about what is policy, what needs to be done, who are the main actors in the institutional framework of government, that can give, that for any particular policy, who are the people that you need to network and integrate. All that is what you learn in a program. And then even if you are a chemist, you could still serve the government in a policy role. Now, therefore, that culture is very different from ours, where policy makers and policy making has hitherto been a monopoly of those already in government. And we've only focused on institutions that enable mid-career training of these officials when they come to a policy-making level. Otherwise, the public administration would do them quite nicely. They are meant to implement policies. They're meant to interact with people. They learn a lot on the job, and they come in, and then the government offers some courses for them in Missouri and in the administrative training institutes. Or when I was in UNDP and the Ford Foundation, we paid for them to go to Harvard and Princeton and the Maxwell School. But now that the government has, I think pretty much in many major statements has acknowledged that a government made up of generalist civil servants making policy is very unsatisfactory, and that everything has become so much more complex, and that the old idea that you could be in the like the Indian civil service officer who's done the greats in Oxford, Latin and Greek, can come and run this country, is if you stated it like that, it's pretty laughable. So I think we need, just as war is too important to be left to generals, public policy is too important to be left to our public servants and the government. And we need more people in civil society, in research think tanks, and elsewhere, who are well grounded in understanding public policy and the implications of different policies. The big corporations employ people now to tell them what are the implications for their businesses of certain policy changes the government may make. So there is an expansion of employment opportunities, the CSR initiatives of corporations also, because in the end, much of public policy is about increasing the supply of public goods, which the market will not provide, or increasing the supply of merit goods like health and education, where the external benefits of these goods are much more than you can incorporate in a cost-benefit analysis. Right. And therefore, the extent to which investments are made in health and education, it becomes a public or a state responsibility for the most part. So CSR initiatives are meant to complement the supply of merit goods, public goods, and could well use people trained in an understanding of public policy. But the big challenge really is that since this is relatively new in our country, we have faculty who are trained in different disciplines, right? And the moment you are trained as an economist or a political scientist or a psychologist, you then, you are influenced by your disciplinary background. So to transcend that and to say, listen, this is not enough just that I know economics, I need to make connections and integrate ideas from other disciplines. So if you teach in a way, the curriculum runs the risk of being some course being mostly economics oriented and another course being mostly sociology oriented. And then you expect the student to connect the dots and to make sense of the two. That's difficult. So given the nature of this subject, our field, it's not really a subject in that sense, a field, public policy, we need to train our teachers to become more interdisciplinary. I mean, it's a word that we use. Most of the time when we say interdisciplinary, it means, oh, you can take courses in multiple disciplines. This is multidisciplinary, is not interdisciplinary. And public policy, if you want to make headway, do research in public policy, you have to actually be transdisciplinary. I mean, you shouldn't be really grounded in any one particular discipline. It's kind of a unified idea of knowledge. You have to get to that point. So I think the immediate challenge really is for us, and one of the things the association could do is to have get together teachers involved in public policy education and get them to understand what it is that they need to do to help students grasp it. In my case, for instance, I tell my students, I've been in 5 universities, 15 years, thanks to a scholarship system, studying sequentially economics, then philosophy, then politics, and then law, right? Constitutional law. Over a long period of time, but all of them have a bearing on public policy. Each one of but then I've learned them over 15 years sequentially. It's out of the question. You should be able to get these insights pertaining to policy in a short period of time. So that's one challenge. The other challenge, and this is where I think we could have a dialogue, because Dr. Arushi Jain made the point that it's a good idea to instill in very young people the importance of public policy and see it as a flourishing career that lies ahead of them. But on the other hand, people may take a different view. They say you must come to this study after you've acquired a certain maturity, right? Now, you see, we started the 5-year law program where there's a BA and an LLB. You teach the BA courses, social science, and then you teach law. But because it's a law program, many students pay little attention to the history and to the sociology and the economics they are taught. They think the important courses are the law courses. And they kind of pass over this. And therefore, they lose out. Whereas the 3-year law program requires that you've done a degree, you could be in science, could have done a degree in Ayurveda and take the LLB course, but you've acquired a certain maturity, a certain training in terms of learning to learn. That may be needed in professional courses in as much as you think of. Now, I like to think of, we reach a point where, we call medicine a practice, we call law a practice. I mean, they call noble professions, right? But public policy ought to become a practice in that sense, that the practitioners of public policy are what is the first thing that you do if you're a doctor? You take the Hippocratic Oath. That there are some underlying values that should be central and influence the way you think of yourself as what are you doing, that thing. So I think that element we need to bring to that, because I think all practices require that, right? I mean, I'm greatly influenced by Alistair McIntyre and the way he talks about how, you take a game like cricket, you play the game for the sake of the game, really. You don't necessarily play the game well because you're going to be given a monetary reward. But the institutions that govern these games, for instance, the BCCI is a corrupt institution. The FIFA is a corrupt institution. But soccer isn't, right? So I think we need to get to a point where we have to have teachers become equipped to be proper teachers of public policy, and we are to begin that.
Thank you. I see I have I'm going to come to a few questions on the chat box, but let me see if Professor Malhotra has his hand up. Rajiv, you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, I'm a little under the weather, and so I couldn't be at the campus in person. But there's one issue that I want to raise, which I think is very central to the whole issue of public policy education. Unlike many disciplines, although at one level no discipline can be taught or education be imparted in a discipline in complete isolation from the society or from complete isolation from people. But there are some subjects where that engagement needs to be much more than others, and public policy is one such area where one needs to have the process of education embedded in the society itself. By that, I'm trying to say that you need to kind of have a formalized interaction between the practitioners, between the policymakers within the public domain and the government domain, the civil society, and the public at large. Now, if we have to really make progress in public policy education in India, I think there is some role for the public policy association or networks to step in and try bridging this gap, which I see. At present, for example, our school has been there for about 10 years. And I'm also kind of associated with some of the work which Bharati School of Public Policy is doing. Arushi is here. But much of this interaction, much of this gap filling that I just alluded to is being done at a very individual level. I think that is, if I know some people, or I'm a former civil servant, or I know some decision makers, that's the kind of interaction that I'm able to bring into the whole process of teaching public policy. I think what I like to see and perhaps put on the table for for the association and the public policy networks in India to consider is how this facet can be addressed, how this gap between education as traditionally or conventionally understood, and how practice it can be, the gap can be narrowed and the whole process can be institutionalized. So I'd like to hear maybe some of you and your reaction to this thought, and also specifically to indicate what is it that as an association one could think in terms of doing in this regard. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thanks, Rajiv. Let's just get one question from the chat box and then we'll ask the panelists. Can you read out one of them?
The same, why do we not focus on incorporating more public policies?
Yeah, we answered that one already.
Yeah, what do we institutes intend on doing that about that?
Yeah, we've answered that. Okay. Go to another one.
The second is the same. Yeah, what is the role?
Oh, just that you have now? Okay. Then we, Rajiv has put the question on the table, I guess, is the issue that is being raised is how can we get practitioners and academics working on public policy and to get the practical questions and experience from the world of practice more integrated into the academia. I think that's a big question in practical ways. I think the need is well established. Nobody questions the need. We all recognize that. But I will tell you that many people have advised us when we get advisory conversations with people from practice or former academics now in consulting and so on. They tell you, do not waste your time trying to work with government people. It's a total waste of time. They will not be interested in talking to academics. So it is kind of easy for us to say we need to do this, but the question is a serious one. How do you do it in practice? And that's what is before the panelists as a challenge, as a constraint. And I'll ask each panelist to sort of react to that. That's one big one. The other big one is, I'll put these two and then turn to the panelists. Drawing from Professor Pabisetti's comments, the first one is the mission statement that the Kautilya apparently has, which is essentially to solve the world's problems, right? So it is to rebalance society, government, and the corporate sector and the power relations. If I recall correctly, the definition of governance used by the United Nations Development Program is in fact the exercise of authority in managing the relationships among these same actors. So it is quite a big, well, at the vision level, I guess it's fine, but training your students to be problem solvers rather than job seekers, I find that fascinating. Because our students, I don't know if they're an odd batch, they tend to ask us all the time, how will this course help me to get a job? It seems that many of our students are keen on jobs, but you somehow have found a way of training people as problem solvers, which I much prefer and like. That will be a much easier task for the academic than trying to train people to get jobs, which is what we seem to be struggling with. In fact, in other courses I have taught, I used to say to people that we are creating too many job seekers and not enough job creators. Now that might be an issue for the people might think for a business school. I think it's also the business of a school on government and public policy. But on that last one, which was posed by you, I'd like you to react, but the other panelists as well. So two big issues for the panelists, right? One is how practically to get this collaboration and integration of practice and academia, and the other one, the ones I just explained, drawing from Professor Pabisetti. Should we start with Professor Dr. Jain and get her reactions, and then come to Professor Raina, and then come to you, Professor Pabisetti, if you don't mind. So, Dr. Jain.
Yes, very interesting question involving practitioners. And as Professor Malhotra has already been a part, individually, the institutions have been doing that with programs. As I said, we are fortunate that we are catering to a very different league of people. Dr. Singh, our people are more problem solvers by the nature of it, because we are catering to a very senior batch of private and public sector professionals, including politicians, entrepreneurs, people from the developmental sector, all of them being in the classroom. So integrating the approach of problem solving in the curriculum, we started with the capstone project, as that's what we call it, and that's like a master's project, but not exactly a master's project. This comes from their own work sphere, and where they have been working and trying to solve the issue, whether they are in the government or in the private sector. We try and help them connect with various stakeholders on the issue that they're trying to research. And we have integrated the entire project over a period of 1 year as they complete their courses, with the very beginning with the policy analysis course, moving to skills-oriented courses like reading and writing analytically, or writing case studies. All of these courses help them in building up on their capstone. That is the product that comes after 1 full year. So so that is the part on, when you say, how do you solve problems? How do you question problems? And all of these skill-oriented courses, that's also one of the questions here. All of these skill-oriented courses in the program that are already existing, apart from the concepts and apart from the domain-related courses, help in a big way in, in actually helping all these participants thinking about the critical problems in policy and the discussions around these policies and how we can solve these problems. The other way is to involve, as I said, for all the educational institutions, the academic institutions, there is a lot of research that goes on in these institutions. How can we involve our students into the ongoing research so that they can start questioning a lot more differently, because they are mostly the practitioners of policy there. So that is the second way of doing it. And when it comes to involving practitioners, I think, as you said, a lot of courses can be taught by academicians, by practitioners, maybe, half of it at times, because there would be courses where you need the academic inputs, but also need practitioners' viewpoint. So these practitioners come up as a part of this course where the two of them are teaching this together. We actually feel that the number of deliberations around public policy need to increase, as I had said in the very beginning. So what we are planning to host in the month of January, that we've just mentioned a couple of times, is the Public Policy Dialogues, which is going to be our annual event. And we plan to bring in the government, the policy makers in the real sense, a few politicians, the executive being there. Along with that, people from the industry, the corporates, the researchers, because, we want to bridge the gap between research and practice. So all of them together in a very different format, a little non-academic to be particular, where, we are not just presenting research papers, but trying to deliberate through panel discussions, through roundtables. There is a very interesting segment called as Innovation Sandbox that we have conceived. And the Innovation Sandbox is basically talking about innovations in public policy and how those, are relevant and how these can actually be scaled and replicated across the country. So I think these kind of deliberations, more and more of these kind of deliberations, if they are held, and if the associations, as Professor Malhotra was talking about, the role of associations, if the associations can pitch in and organize such kind of roundtables, discussions, wherein practice and research can come together, I think that's what I feel would be the way forward.
Thank you. Professor Rainer.
Had a very detailed answer from you, Dr. Jain. I'm kind of wondering what to say. There are two things. One is, I'll take Rajiv's question about, let's say, institutionalization of, some form of relationship between, practitioner and the educator, researcher, right? I mean, how do we do that? Right now, yes, we are all going through, some bureaucrat who studied with us or did some research with us. That's the network now that works. But what do we do to change this, right? So the key question is, how does a bureaucrat, how does, let's say, the practitioner make decisions now? Yeah. What many of us find, and I speak from the agricultural sciences, rural development, and a whole range of rural issues, water. There is a kind of, let's say, precedence-based approach. That is, something was done last year. We'll do a little bit of that. We'll add a little innovation here. We'll modify a little guideline here. Yeah, that's it. There's maybe a little more a step ahead now, which is a good thing, working with some civil society organizations that can bring in a breath of fresh air into what is available as a policy or program. The state's own, like let's say, from within, yeah. When we want to institutionalize something, the desire has to come from within. The state's own, let's say, demand for institutionalizing a relationship for learning from the academic community is, absent. Yeah. So how do we get to build a learning state is actually one of the key questions that the association should take forward. Because here's an association that is talking about pedagogy. It's not about just training, let's say, mid-career bureaucrats or executives from private or public sector, it doesn't matter. It should be not about that, but also about getting to build a learning state. Let's say a Gram Panchayat, local municipal council. I mean, we could do, let's say, engage with these bodies at different levels and say, what are the capacities that we need to build this? Rajiv's question about institutionalization it's kind of opened a floodgate of questions about what do we do? For instance, where does let's say the anticipation, the capacity for anticipation lie within this particular practitioner? Yeah. So what is their capacity for ex ante policy analysis? Not like simulation was an example that you gave of publicity. So simulation, yes, but which of our bureaucracies do a simulation exercise? Are they even conscious of something that is possible? A scenario planning exercise. Are they capable of using these tools to build anticipatory capacities within our government bodies? This should be one of the key agendas that we should take forward. That's, I think, one way to institutionalize this. The second is, of course, the question of reflexivity in learning. That is reflexivity as look back at what you did last year before last, and say, where did we go wrong? The ability for deliberation, bring in stakeholders, as Dr. Arusha was saying, bring them and their perspectives into your policy analysis. So how do you mobilize this? So building capacities for these two should be part of the agenda, should be part of the, let's say, the steps that will lead up to the association will take up going ahead. Capacities for anticipation or anticipatory thinking within the government practitioners, capacities for reflection and deliberation. I think these are the two central capacities that we should focus on building. Small exercises, workshops, that would be great. And again, like you were saying, Dr. Jain, at different levels, yeah. A urban local body, maybe a union government ministry, it could be different things. Sweden, for instance, now has demolished or done away with its environment ministry. Environment is part of every ministry now. It should be laudable, because you can't help but have reflexivity and learning within every decision that you make that impacts you, and everything that we do impacts the environment, right? So it's built into, by demolishing that and making it part of every other activity that we have,
it's gained much more importance and, like we say, salience, that it's important, you have to do it, you don't have a choice, right? So I'm really glad that we wrote this agenda. Thank you.
No, very, very interesting points. Of course, the Ministry of Environment was necessary at one time, but then it grows, like the Ministry of Gender. Some governments had that, and now it's mainstream across, and that's great. Of course, to do what you have just recommended, Professor Raina, will be a bit of a challenge if you have a government, which I've heard Professor Sudarshan describe sometimes as knowledge proof. So, that could make it a bit of a challenge, but we'll see how to do that. But yes, Professor Balisetti, please.
Well, just to kind of clarify, I'm not saying that we should not help our students get jobs. We should do that. And even today we had a pre-placement talk at our university at lunchtime. We should do all of it, but then we should not forget to set the North Star for our students. It's to tell them to think beyond a job at the end of the curriculum, the 2-year or 1-year learning period that they are with us. And that's constantly what we are doing as faculty, as director, as dean, and also as mentors, right? Each one of them get to spend time with a very experienced practitioner in the field for the entire 2-year period, as through mentoring sessions, and ask, hey, what choice do I make in terms of choosing the elective? What choice do I make in terms of taking the internship, the capstone project? Because between internship and capstone project, they spend 9 months of their time, right? And it's a very significant amount of time where they have choice of deciding where they want to do and how they want to do, right? So it's important that we tell them that, don't look at a short-term placement objective, but rather look at what do you want to learn over a career of 2 to 3 decades that you will be in. And when we start asking these questions, the students will say, you know what, I will tactically do one of these two, the internship or the capstone, but the other one, I will actually look at a career goal that I'm looking at, right? And it's for us to always kind of keep telling them that in public policy, fixed tenures are not there, right? I mean, no advisor knows how long he'll be advising a policymaker. No policymaker is sure how long he'll be a policymaker. No bureaucrat is sure when he'll get transferred, right? So with this uncertainty, you need to kind of always bring adaptability into their thinking, their thought process. And it's better that we reinforce it every single day of the time that they are in our but look, this was the institution, this was a tenure, so many people came into work, and one fine day the regime changed and the entire entity itself was disbanded, right? So it's the more and more we start setting the right North Star for our students, then they will kind of keep that in mind and say, hey, you know what? Yes, I need to get a job. I need to repay my loan, my EMI, and all of these things. But they'll always tell themselves that there is a career choice that I can make at some point of time in the future. And when I sit down to make that career decision, I should have enough groundwork done during my 2 years at a master's program, right? Also, thing that's worked for us is not to look for a very specific starting point while working with the government. And I'm sure all of us will recognize in this room that when COVID hit all of us hard, many of us were involved in working with various levels of the government to kind of be part of solutioning, right? And there was no specific role that any of us waited to be given before we said, okay, fine, can we help you, right? And I remember talking to one of the senior bureaucrats and said, hey, you know what? I'm going to be here for the next 6 weeks. Tell me whenever you need for whatever you need, right? And the incessant number of conversations that we had during that entire COVID response helped the government also to take better decisions and respond better, right? And similarly, our students had a choice of working with a corporate versus department for their internship. And I always ask them a single clarifying question, telling that, how often will you get an opportunity to sit inside a government department and look at how a decision is being made, as compared to any consulting or corporate role you will get anytime tomorrow, right? So it's for us to see how our students are given the right direction to look at public policy in all its imperatives. And some of our students did very meaningful work where they were able to write end-to-end guidelines for rolling out one of the policies, right? So I think that's very, very liberating thought for them, telling that, you know what, till now I was sitting outside of the government, and in 6 weeks we were able to put a small instrument of into the government's working, and I was able to contribute to it, right? So there are multiple start points. We work across state governments, various other levels of government, but we always say that students should be nimble and be willing to start from wherever vantage point they have, and then gain additional authorization as they do better and better contribution.
Excellent. The last round of question, unless I get from other participants to the panelists. I've been listening for some of the words that you use, and I brought a few in this last round, like anticipatory, and just now, like adaptive. So the issue I think that's facing lots of public policy work is that as we move into this world that is becoming increasingly complex, we will have larger degrees of uncertainty to manage. Somehow we will have to make policy in the face of uncertainty that's growing, whether it's global, national, or local level. So we would have to be using approaches that are anticipatory, approaches that are adaptive, approaches that are flexible and iterative. We will have to bring in a new set of tools into the public policy curriculum. Now, I think that that can be done in the academia. We who are teaching can easily bring those in. I mean, many of us are familiar, we are teaching that stuff at our center on complexity economics, applied spirituality, and public policy. We do that kind of work. And I recall a conversation I had with Professor Reina some time ago, and I didn't know that she had edited a book on post-growth or something of that kind. And I was asking the question, you know, can we even achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which are all anchored on more and more growth? You know, and yet we are talking of some fanciful world by 2030 where we'll achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. We can't do it if countries which are already well off continue to do more and more material consumption-based growth. So we have this bunch of challenges. How do we communicate this to the policymaker? How do we engage our existing policymaker, let's say in India, either at the state level or at the central level? That's my question to the panelists. I think if you can give us some concrete answers on this, it will probably help the world. So let us go in the same order and then we'll wrap it up that we just followed. Maybe we'll start with Dr. Jain and then we'll go to Dr. Raina and then Dr. Fabiset. So Dr. Jain, you want to help save the world? Please go ahead.
Muted. Muted.
Dr. Jain, you.
Unmute. Not unmuting. Let's get Dr. Raina to go there while we get Dr. Jain unmuted.
Sure.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I've put a paper which I'm sure nobody's read on science for sustainable development and science for development, which are two different things. And while our ways of working in the sciences informed by growth and also a different kind of substantive economics, which is again, you know, just the rudimentary level of the substantialism, because there's nothing that is substantive, it's all about formalism after that. So that won't do. So that's, I agree with your problem that how can we get to sustainable development if we are building everything on these three pillars, on economic growth, and then again adding, you know, social lending, environmental sustainability to it. So one of the things that I think, but we've had some response with, is to point out, again, anticipatory thinking, to point out where some indicators, for instance, of complexity theory, for instance, of connectivity or redundancy, point out some of those indicators to policymakers. Say that, well, I mean, it need not be an Niti Aayog, to be any of these, a local, well, a local urban body, like looking at sewage treatment plants, for instance. Tell them that these are the connectivities that are central to keeping, well, your water system safe, your drainage system safe. So in terms of pointing out where the social ecological system connectivities are visible in the urban map, then they look at, I mean, in other words, not just a paper presentation, but show them a map. Yeah, show them that these are the points where the connectivity is likely to break, and that you will have a gap in this, well, whether it's a water flow or drainage or whatever. So pointing out things on a map at least catches the eye. I'm not too sure whether they'll understand what the problem is, but at the very least, they'll see that there are certain uncertainties out there, and that we should guard some of these connectivities that are crucial to keep the system going. We should guard them. But that, at the very least, you can get that message across. I'm just saying that this is the, well, let's say, this is a little toenail in the wall that I have got thus far. So again, like you said, there's a lot more to do, a long way to go. I mean, we have to kind of break and help reconstruct the wall with different material understandings of this. But I don't think it's going to happen in the near future. I often fear that we're waiting for some big catastrophe to kind of learn. I mean, it doesn't look like, it'll happen without that, because it's, like we said, a learning state has to come up. I mean, and given the uncertainty that we're facing with everything that we're doing now, we should actually be prepared for, well, the state to either wake up with a catastrophe or, I don't know, a different kind of state. So, sorry, it's not an answer.
No, it's at least a pointer in the right direction, I think. Thank you for that. And I thank you as well for the recommendation for the Association of Public Policy Education, that if they can work towards moving a state to a learning state in the policy area, they would have done human service. Yeah, excellent. Can you hear me, Professor Babisetti? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think for us, as I keep saying, how do we get multiple start points and start making more and more impact from wherever we are able to start is very important to inculcate. And I believe that's where more and more of our effort should come in, telling how do we pool our resources, how do we pool our research case studies, how do we pool our data sets that we are gathering. All of us are gathering data for multiple reasons, and how do we kind of bring them all together is going to be very important as we craft the journey forward, right? And yeah, I think that's where I would like to stop, but happy to chip in again if required. Over to you, Dr. Arushi.
Yeah, go ahead, Dr. James.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I've missed what my fellow panelists have been speaking, and there was a power cut and something happened.
Okay, go ahead.
I know the question. We're talking of complexity, adaptability, and of course, all of us live in this very interesting world where all systems are these complex adaptive systems. I think I'll begin by saying that, it's very important for policy students to understand that in order to design better interventions, they have to understand the sciences of complexity a little more better. So this has to be integrated in the curriculum. There is uncertainty, there is lack of perfect evidence, and all of us are very aware of it. So, talking about the dynamic and complex entities, how do you ensure a bit of certainty, a bit of, probably iteration in your processes of thinking, especially in terms of policy analysis, or when even if it comes to aspects like monitoring and evaluation, is something that has to be told to the students and has to be integrated in all our curriculums in public policy. As we were just hearing Dr. Sridhar talk about data, and he did mention about it earlier. I think data and open data is something that we also stand for in a very, very big way. We've tried our best with an India data portal that we had launched as a repository of open data. We are, welcoming all institutions to, collaborate with us for this entire initiative of the data portal. The more data is openly available, and we've been working with the state governments across the country to help them open up this data, to, move the India data portal to state data portals, and with the help of the governments, if we can have more and more open data available for the researchers, so that the uncertainties, the evidence that we are talking about can probably be a little better with data that's available. I think India needs this at this time, and it's true for any other developing country. But India, I think data is the gold. It's whatever you call it, and I think that is the way forward. So I'll stop at that.
Yeah, all right. Yeah.
If I may come in again with a simple.
Sure.
Yeah, I think, yes, we are in a VUCA world. And I think one of the things that I got away from my days at IIM Bangalore is how do we prepare for a VUCA world? And I think for almost a decade, the VUCA world did not hit us as much as it has hit us in the last 6-7 years. But often I think that one of the things that our governments can benefit, and maybe even many large corporates, is to start adopting more and more simplistic design and simplistic structures to respond to complex situations, right? I mean, all of us are aware of how many instructions came around from state government and central government and city governments, different departments in the administration during COVID. And it was just overwhelming for somebody to know, can I fly from Bangalore to Mumbai today? What kind of test should I do? Where should I do? And all of these things. I think somewhere simplification, if we can inculcate in all stakeholders in solving public problem, I think a lot of our problems will be solved, right? And I think something that we always go back to us, can you simplify this complex map that you have written? And without foregoing the learning that you have had in this thing. And they go back, they come back and say, hey, is this more understandable? And then we say, yes. Now, don't leave out the old one. You keep that in the annexure. But always when we try and simplify, it makes more impact.
So the only point I'd make on that is that, maybe to quote from our favorite guy, Einstein, is that, or maybe Mencken as well, is that things should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. In other words, if you simplify or attempt to simplify some of the essential complexity, we will have some problems, because the complexity might be inherent to the system, and you change the whole system if you take that out. But your points about the VUCA world are well taken. Everybody knows the acronym VUCA by now, I guess. It stands from volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, which is the world we are entering and must make policy. Volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. But I think Professor Tanvir wants to make a comment on how to solve problems in the VUCA world. Please. And then we'll wrap up.
I think this is the first time I'm listening to this abbreviation, this very snappy acronym, which is called VUCA, right? So, but I think in VUCA also we can add one more A, and that is attention, right? In public policy, of course, the first thing that we need to focus on is attention. What exactly we want to do. So there are a lot of questions, I think it's a very, let's say, informative and engaging round that we've had today, particularly in the morning also, we discussed about education and now public policy education and now. It's a very interesting and very, I think for me, educative also. A couple of things I have in my mind. One is, of course, somebody said that there is science of complexity. If it is science, it is not complex. It has to be arts or, or maybe commerce or economics also, maybe. Then it is complex. But I understand complexity as something which is abstract, right? Complexity and that complexity, which I call it an abstract, is where we have to focus. Which means that, we need to focus on the knowledge, policy knowledge, that in the morning also we were discussing about that, somewhere we have to carve a boundary that this is what public policy knowledge is and this is not, right? This is the first thing that we need to do. The moment we open it up for all the disciplines, there is a barrage of discipline coming in, right? And sort of appropriating it as their own discipline. I mean, of course, Laswell is the father of public policy. Some of these scholars, they call him, who gets what, when and how. That is what he started, the policy sciences. Had he been in India, I always say that he must have said that who gets what, when and how, and for whom. Because in India, for whom is more important. My own people, my community, my caste, of course, we talked about it. So we are essentially talking about policy knowledge, how we create it. Now that's the work of academia, right? That's the work of the university, of the teachers, where we sit, and we must be very sensitive to the experiences that the practitioners have, right? So practitioners, they have experience, but somebody has to generalize those experiences. Somebody will have to connect those experiences to come out a larger generalization, which would perhaps then be applied in the real world. So the process of generalization, where we use various methods, morning also I said, that's very important. And that's because every practitioner, they have their own stories, right? They have their own stories, they have their own experience. I don't know how much true it is. I mean, every bureaucrat say that, when I was there, I did this. I don't know whether he has done that or not. Every bureaucrat says that you don't know because you're not there on the ground. I know because I have done this. But I don't know. He may be completely lying, right? I don't have any evidence to that. So the question of truth is also very important in public policy. McIntyre's understanding of virtue and truth and all these things are very, very important. I have a suggestion. No, I was this morning, I was just thinking, how do we approach this subject? That's the question that is sort of boggling us. Why not public policy students should understand the central conceptions which define public policy? Like, for example, power. Power is the central conceptions not only to politics, but economics, to sociology, to anthropology. So why don't we pick up power as a central conception for the discipline of public policy? Accountability, for example. At the end of the day, even if we talk about policy making, policy implementing, policy analysis, we always look in terms of accountability framework, that how public policy would be more effective, when it goes down to the ground level. So I think central conceptions can be charted out, and we discuss public policy around those central conceptions. There are approaches. There can be different approaches to study public policy, disciplinary approaches to public policy, but somewhere the central conceptions, because I don't know, if I ask a student of public policy that, do you have any idea of the history of how power has been defined and how power has evolved over the period of time, and what power in democracy means, from Robert Dahl onwards to lots of philosophers and academicians they have talked about. So how it can be weaved into public policy, right? Because that's the central concern. You know, the whole idea of their communities, government, for instance, you know, defining, they all are power symbols. Even in interpretive, Frank Fisher also talks about the symbols which are well loaded by power. You know, how do you deconstruct that? So I think it's important for my understanding. One approach is the traditional way that we are doing in college, also university, also. It's a very traditional way of understanding public policy. So my understanding is that let's bring in those central conceptions. Apart from this, I mean, these are important. I'm not saying that one will have to describe, and I'm not saying that we do not have to consider practitioners. Practitioners are very, very important. But it is for the academicians to understand that, you know, what should be taken from the practitioners as a guiding source for the larger generalization to put into the research, you know, the problem solving approach, you know, because at the end of the day, also interpretive will have to look into certain problems, right? I mean, there's a connect. So for me, complexity is the abstract, and it is a challenge for all of us in the academy to how to simplify, concretize those abstracts and put it into the public policy curriculum. Thank you.
So we'll wrap it up now. Let me just say that Professor Tanvir, the traditional sciences or reductive sciences is what you think of science, but complexity is actually one of the newer sciences. It's fully a science, including Nobel Prize winners in science. So just that you're aware of that. And so it's really concrete, and we do a lot of work on that. But your bigger point, I think, on power and other central concepts in policy, I think the APPE really needs to put that on the agenda. I have been doing some work on power, and the research question is how to make power a positive sum game. I think that's key for policy. The zero-sum game is the issue, the problem we face. The solution is power as a positive sum game, and some work on that would be quite interesting. Look, to wrap this up now, I think we have gone over time a little bit. Let me ask the newly minted Secretary of the Association for Public Policy Education to give our concluding remarks. Manoj.
Thank you everyone who is participating in this panel, and special gratitude to Dr. Naresh for helping us chair this panel, and our gratitude also to the speakers, Dr. Rajeshwari, Dr. Arushi, who has joined us online, and Professor Sridhar. Thank you for sharing and contributing to the discussion and the discourse that the association would like to look forward to take public policy and education ahead. And mainly our focus this year will be on formation of the teachers, those who will be involved in the public policy. And I'm sure most of you will be updated on what's happening. A special word of gratitude to Dean Professor Sudarshan for putting your leadership and bringing us together, and all the faculty members who have joined, friends, colleagues, and also members of the association and think tanks that are online present, and and the students who have come. There are also a couple of them online, and I'm sure that let's promote some of this recordings among the groups so that they are able to listen. Special gratitude to the technical team and the hospitality team, and thank you to the university for helping us host this panel. Let's continue this conversation as we go ahead. And I just want to have two announcements made on behalf of the association. The association hereby opens the membership to public policy practitioners and educators. If you know that you would like to join, and if you find people in this field who would like to be part of the association, please nudge them and ask them to join. The second announcement is that the board, they are meeting in the morning, decided that the association is opening the membership to the institutions. So a warm welcome to all the institutions. You'll get more details on how you can join us. So the association is growing, and I would thank all of you who are supporting us and will continue to be with us. So a big thank you to all to make this evening a success. That's all.
That brings us to the end. Thanks to all of you again. Thanks, Manoj, for doing that.
Thank you. I'll just suggest.
Thanks to the chair.
Yeah, no, for the next discussion of this kind, the topic I propose is how to bring the public into public policy. Public policies are made without any consultation with the public. So public is the missing element in public policy. How to bring the public into policy making is, there are ways of doing it. We should discuss that.
One last word. I think a big gratitude to Pratik who has brought this all together. Thank you.
I want to thank Professor Sridhar Babashetty, also Professor Arushi Jain and Professor Rana, they accepted my invitation. So thank you very much. And thank you to Professor Pathak. He sent Ashish, our colleague from ISPP, and Patsha. He's the director of ISPP. So thanks to both of them. They're not here, but I hope we can raise to them. So thank you very much, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Yes, for a long day.
Thank you. Have a great day ahead. Thank you all.
Can there be public policy for private business firms? Oh, yeah. That's right. It's the law of the corporation, the public policy for private.
The status of the enabler of the corporate, right?
There's one article by the old one, at least, he said that public and private are all similar, but it's all unimportant. So take it up. Okay. No, bring on it. Yes. So you are telling me to go? Yes. We have to engage from here. Powers that would not receive it up, but then there's power. Yes, the powers. I